Life 2.1 million years ago moved at the pace of breath and blood. Nothing was certain, and nothing was permanent. The land that would one day fracture into deserts and valleys was still alive with water, grass, and shifting skies. Rivers spread and withdrew without warning. Lakes appeared, lingered, and vanished. The ground remembered every footstep only briefly before wind and rain erased it. Survival here was never a state, it was a condition renewed each day. Across this landscape walked small bands of early humans. They were not yet masters of fire, nor builders of shelters that lasted beyond a season. Their bodies were narrow and efficient, shaped by distance and hunger rather than strength alone. Their faces carried the marks of an unfinished species, jaws strong but not yet refined, brains growing but still bound by instinct. These were Homo habilis, close to the threshold of something new, though unaware of it. They lived close to the earth, and closer still to fear. They did not dominate this world, they negotiated with it. Every movement was a calculation made without words. The rustle of grass could signal food or death. The shadow of a cloud could hide a predator's approach. Their days unfolded within narrow margins. Calories gained had to outweigh calories spent. A wrong decision lingered in bones scattered across the plain. Water shaped their lives more than any other force. The rivers were arteries of survival, drawing animals, insects, and vegetation into tight corridors of abundance. Along their banks, the soil was softer, the air cooler. Roots were easier to dig. Carcasses were more likely to be found. But water also drew danger. Large predators waited where prey gathered. Crocodiles slid beneath the surface, invisible until the moment of impact. The water promised life, but it demanded constant vigilance. Near these waters lived other lineages, far older than the humans who now shared their territory. Crustaceans, descendants of ancient marine worlds, had followed the retreat and advance of seas for tens of millions of years. As coastlines shifted and inland waters formed, some of these creatures adapted to brackish lakes and river mouths. Over time, size became an advantage. Armor thickened, claws grew heavier. What emerged were giant freshwater crabs, creatures shaped not by speed, but by endurance and defense. These crabs were not monsters in the sense of myth. They were the product of patience and time. Their shells bore the scars of countless seasons. Their movements were slow, deliberate, and precise. Each step was anchored to the ground, each claw capable of crushing bone or splitting wood. They did not hunt in the way mammals hunted. They waited. They consumed what the water delivered. Fish, carrion, small animals that strayed too close to the banks. Even crocodile eggs were not beyond their reach. For generations, Homo habilis had learned to avoid them. The crabs were known through absence as much as presence. Missing limbs, broken tools, the sudden silence near certain stretches of water. These early humans did not tell stories as later humans would, but memory passed through behavior. Paths curved away from particular banks, children were kept back. The elders watched the water longer than they watched the sky. But the land was changing. Rainfall patterns shifted, subtle at first, then persistent. Dry seasons lengthened, vegetation thinned, herds altered their migration routes. What had once been reliable sources of food grew scarce. Homo habilis, already stretched thin by their environment, began to feel pressure from all sides. Hunger sharpened attention. Risk became a calculation rather than an absolute. It was during one such dry phase that the boundary between avoidance and confrontation began to erode. The rivers narrowed, pools became isolated. In these shrinking waters, fish were trapped in abundance. Carcasses collected where animals had come to drink and failed. For a band of Homo habilis, this concentration of food represented something rare, surplus. They approached cautiously. The air was heavy with the smell of decay and damp earth. Insects clouded the surface of the water. Bones lay half buried in mud. The humans moved together, alert, scanning the reeds and the waterline. Stone tools were carried in hand, crude but effective. These tools were not weapons designed for combat. They were extensions of survival shaped to cut, scrape, and break. The crabs were already there. Partially submerged, their shells blended with the mud and stone. Only the slow movement of water betrayed them, a ripple where no wind passed, a shift in shadow beneath the surface. The humans froze. Their bodies recognized the danger before their minds could articulate it. Muscles tightened, breathing slowed. For generations, this would have been the moment to retreat, but hunger pressed from behind, and opportunity lay ahead. One of the crabs was large, but it was also exposed. The receding water had limited its mobility. Its path back to deeper water was narrow. This was not a moment of aggression. It was a moment of decision. The difference mattered. The humans did not rush. They circled, keeping distance. They tested the ground with their feet. Stones were lifted, weighed, set down again. The crab raised a claw in warning, its movements slow but powerful. The shell glistened in the sun, scarred and ancient. A stone struck the shell. It was not meant to kill. It was meant to learn. The sound was dull, unsatisfying. The crab shifted, turning toward the disturbance. Another stone followed, striking closer to a joint. The crab reacted faster this time, lunging forward with surprising speed. One human stumbled back, narrowly avoiding the snapping claw. Fear surged, sharp and immediate. But it did not end the encounter. Instead, it clarified it. The humans adjusted. They spread out further. They began to understand the limits of the crab's reach, the angle of its movement, the delay between intent and action. What unfolded next was not a battle in the modern sense. It was a prolonged engagement shaped by caution and curiosity. Stones were thrown, not in panic, but with intent. Each impact tested the shell. Each reaction revealed something new. The crab's armor was formidable, but not invulnerable. Joints flexed, eyes retracted. The creature's strength was immense, but its world was narrow. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher. Sweat darkened skin. The crab grew agitated, its movements more frequent, less controlled. It attempted to retreat, but the shallows resisted it. Mud clung to its limbs. Its weight, once an advantage, became a constraint. At some point, a stone struck true. It landed where shell met joint, where armor gave way to necessity. The crab recoiled, a limb faltering. The humans did not cheer. There was no celebration, only a tightening of focus. They pressed the advantage carefully, aware that one mistake could still mean death. When the crab finally ceased moving, the silence that followed was heavy. The water stilled. Insects resumed their buzzing. The humans stood at a distance, watching, waiting. They had learned enough to know that death was not always immediate, that danger lingered even in stillness. Eventually, one approached. A stone tool struck again, then again. The shell cracked. The sound was sharp, almost brittle. Inside was food. Dense, rich, unlike anything they had harvested before. Protein and fat concentrated in a single body. The band fed slowly. There was no frenzy. Each bite was deliberate. The meat was shared. Even the young received portions. The remains were stripped and broken further, marrow-like tissue scraped from within. Nothing was wasted. This was more than a meal. It was an inflection point. The humans did not understand it as such. They did not mark the moment or remember it as a story, but something fundamental had shifted. A boundary once considered absolute had been crossed. A creature once defined solely by danger had become a resource. In the days that followed, the band lingered near the water longer than before. They watched the crabs from a distance, observing patterns. When they moved, when they fed, when they retreated. Knowledge accumulated, not as abstract thought, but as embodied memory. Other bands would learn of this place through subtle signs, broken shells, scattered fragments, paths that led closer to the water rather than away. Over time, the idea spread without words. The river was no longer just a line to be feared.
It was a frontier. The crabs did not disappear. They adapted as they always had. Some retreated to deeper waters, others became more cautious, but the balance had changed. Homo habilis, once a marginal presence at the water's edge, had asserted themselves in a new way, not through dominance, but through understanding. This shift carried consequences that reached far beyond the moment. Access to new food sources altered survival rates. Children lived longer. Adults recovered more quickly from injury. Energy budgets expanded, allowing for longer ranges, more exploration, more experimentation. Stone tools improved subtly. Edges grew sharper, shapes became more consistent. The hands that shaped them grew more confident. The mind that guided those hands learned to anticipate not just immediate needs, but future ones. The environment continued to change. Droughts returned, floods followed, species rose and fell. But Homo habilis carried something forward now, something invisible but enduring. A willingness to engage with danger, not blindly, but thoughtfully. A recognition that the world's boundaries were not fixed, only perceived. Along the riverbanks, the giant crabs remained, silent witnesses to this transition. Their lineage would continue for thousands of years, adapting to shifting waters and climates. Eventually, many would vanish, unable to keep pace with the rapid changes driven by climate and competition. Homo habilis would change too. Their descendants would grow taller, stronger, more cognitively complex. Fire would be tamed, language would emerge, tools would become weapons, then symbols, then art. But all of that lay far in the future. Here, in this moment, 2.1 million years ago, the world was still raw and unresolved. Survival was still negotiated daily. And a small group of early humans stood at the edge of the water, learning for the first time that fear could be studied, and that understanding could carve a path where none had existed before. The river flowed on, indifferent to the lives it shaped and ended. The sun set, casting long shadows across the mud and bone-strewn banks. Night would bring its own dangers. Tomorrow would demand new decisions. Nothing was finished.
The night that followed the killing was not marked by triumph. It was marked by listening. The humans did not sleep deeply. They lay close together, bodies aligned with the contours of the ground, eyes opening at every unfamiliar sound. The river spoke constantly, its low movement broken by insects, by distant splashes, by the occasional call of an animal searching for safety. Somewhere in the darkness, other crabs moved. Somewhere beyond them, larger predators waited. The world did not pause for their decision. Morning returned without ceremony. Light crept across the plain, revealing what had been left behind. Shell fragments lay scattered near the water's edge, bright against the darker mud. Birds had already begun to gather, pecking at scraps too small to matter. The smell of exposed flesh lingered. It would fade soon, erased by heat and wind, but for now it marked the place. The band moved on, carrying what they could. Their pace was steady, unhurried, but alert. The energy gained from the crab settled into their bodies differently than meat from smaller animals. It lasted longer. Muscles responded with less strain. Minds felt clearer, less narrowed by hunger. This was not understood consciously, but it was felt. Days passed, then weeks. The memory of the encounter did not fade. It sharpened. Each time the band encountered water, their behavior shifted. They watched longer, they tested the ground more carefully, stones were selected with greater intent. Some were carried farther than usual, chosen not just for cutting, but for weight and balance. Other encounters followed, though none were identical. Some crabs retreated early, slipping into deeper channels before humans could position themselves. Others were smaller, less dangerous, and fell quickly. A few were too large, too well positioned, and the humans withdrew without loss. Each outcome added another layer to their understanding. This learning was slow, uneven, and costly.
One young male misjudged a distance and lost 2 fingers to a closing claw. The wound healed poorly. He survived, but his grip would never fully recover. An older female was knocked to the ground when a crab lunged unexpectedly. She escaped, but the fall cracked a rib. Pain followed her for the rest of the season. These injuries were not treated as mistakes. They were absorbed into the collective memory, shaping future decisions. The crabs, too, adjusted. Those that survived encounters grew more cautious, remaining closer to deep water, feeding more at night. Some shifted their territories entirely, abandoning exposed banks for safer channels. Over time, the river's ecology changed subtly. Carcasses accumulated in different places, smaller scavengers followed. The rhythm of life along the water adapted to this new pressure. Homo habilis did not control these changes, they participated in them. As seasons turned, the landscape continued its slow transformation. Grasslands expanded and contracted, tree cover thinned in some areas, thickened in others. The climate oscillated between wet and dry phases, each lasting years rather than days. These shifts forced movement. Bands split, merged, and reformed. Knowledge traveled with them, embedded in habits rather than words. Some groups never engaged the crabs directly. They remained cautious, relying on plant foods, small animals, and scavenged carcasses. Others adopted the new strategy more fully, refining it over time. These differences mattered. Groups with access to richer, more reliable protein sources had advantages that accumulated quietly. Children survived illnesses that would have killed others. Adults recovered from wounds more quickly. Elders lived long enough to pass on more experience. This was not destiny, it was probability. Stone tools changed further. The act of striking shell and joint demanded precision. Stones were flaked more deliberately. Edges were tested against hard surfaces, not just flesh and hide. Hands learned to anticipate resistance. Arms learned to strike with control rather than force alone. These physical lessons fed back into cognition, reinforcing the link between intention and outcome. The riverbanks became places of attention, not just for food, but for observation. The humans watched how other animals approached the water, which ones hesitated, which ones drank quickly and fled. They noticed patterns they had not noticed before, because now those patterns mattered more. Predators noticed them too. Large cats began to associate human presence with opportunity. A distracted band near the water could mean an easy kill. Crocodiles lingered longer when humans were active, drawn by the possibility of scraps or weakened individuals. Danger multiplied, not diminished. Every gain carried a cost. One afternoon, during a particularly harsh dry season, the balance nearly collapsed. The river had retreated into a series of shallow pools connected by narrow channels. Fish were plentiful, but so were crabs, concentrated and defensive. The band approached one pool cautiously, scanning the banks. The water was still, deceptively calm. They did not see the largest crab until it moved. It emerged from under an overhang of mud, its shell encrusted with sediment, its claws massive and scarred. This was an old individual, one that had survived many seasons, many threats. Its presence dominated the space instantly. The humans froze, their bodies reacting as one. Retreat was possible, but costly. This pool was one of the last reliable sources of water for days. To abandon it would mean a long detour, increased exposure, and uncertain outcomes. The decision that followed was not unanimous, but it was collective. They would not attack, they would test. Stones were thrown, not to provoke, but to map reaction. The crab responded aggressively, surging forward with startling speed, forcing the humans back. The ground was uneven. One slipped, another stumbled. Panic flared, brief but intense. For a moment, the old fear returned, sharp and absolute. Then it receded. The humans regrouped, spacing themselves wider, using elevation where they could. They waited. The crab, having asserted dominance, settled back into the pool, claws raised, eyes alert. Time stretched. The sun burned overhead. Thirst pressed in. Eventually, the crab made a mistake. It shifted position, exposing a flank as it adjusted to the changing light. A stone struck hard, precisely where the shell thinned near a joint. The crab recoiled, not wounded, but startled. The humans pressed forward, cautiously, stones landing in quick succession. The engagement lasted longer than any before. It was exhausting, physically and mentally. The crab fought to retreat, dragging its heavy body toward deeper water. The humans blocked its path, not with force, but with positioning. Each movement was deliberate, learned from past encounters. When the crab finally collapsed, it was not from a single blow, but from accumulated strain. Its limbs failed under its own weight. Its energy reserves, built over years, were spent in minutes. The aftermath was different this time. The humans did not linger. They processed the body quickly, efficiently, taking what they needed and retreating before other predators could arrive. This was not hesitation, it was strategy. Something had changed again. The river no longer represented a binary of safety and danger. It had become a system to be navigated, manipulated carefully, with respect for its limits. The humans did not dominate it. They engaged with it on more equal terms. This shift echoed outward through generations. Children born into these bands grew up watching adults approach water differently. They learned where to stand, where not to. They learned which stones mattered, which movements invited danger. These lessons were absorbed before language could formalize them. Over thousands of years, these behaviors contributed to broader changes. Homo habilis would give rise to other forms, Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, beings with larger bodies, more complex minds, and greater ranges. The willingness to confront risk thoughtfully, honed at riverbanks like this one, would serve them again and again. The giant crabs would not survive indefinitely. As climates shifted and waterways changed, many would disappear, their niches overtaken by other species. Their shells would fossilize, fragment, and eventually vanish beneath layers of sediment. Their encounters with early humans would leave no direct record. But the impact remained. It lived in the shape of tools, in the structure of hands, in the wiring of brains that learned to pause, to observe, to test before acting. It lived in the quiet confidence with which later humans approached unfamiliar challenges. At 2.1 million years ago, nothing about this future was guaranteed. Extinction loomed constantly. One drought too severe, one epidemic too strong, one predator too efficient could have erased these lineages entirely. Survival was not a march forward, it was a balance maintained moment by moment. As the sun set again over the ancient river, the water reflected a sky indifferent to what had occurred along its banks. The humans moved away into the tall grass, their figures small against the widening plain. Behind them, the river resumed its ancient rhythm, carrying silt, life, and memory downstream. The crabs that remained retreated into shadow. The predators resumed their patrols. Insects rose in clouds as evening cooled the air. The world continued, as it always had, shaped by countless interactions too small to notice individually, but immense in their accumulation. Nothing announced the significance of what had happened here. No mark remained that would endure beyond a season. And yet, in the deep structure of behavior and choice, something irreversible had begun. The future would build upon it, quietly, relentlessly, without awareness of its origin. The river flowed on.